the film was preposterous, the idea that Oxford wrote Shakespeare's plays. This has been going on now for some time, since 1920 or thereabouts, when John Thomas Looney wrote a book on Shakespeare claiming that Shakespeare was written by Oxford. It's been promulgated ever since, and now it's finally reached the full identity theft level in a movie called Anonymous. The beginning of the film, devoted Oxfordian Derek Jacobi comes out and says, well, we have nothing that's written by Shakespeare, and says we have no indication of his education. There's no records of his education at Stratford, but there's nobody's records at that time of Stratford education. I think he was tutored anyway. I think he was probably recognized as a genius as a very young boy, a kind of wonder kind, and I think he was tutored. Could very well have been Edmund Campion, who was his tutor, who was called the Diamond of England, and one of the most brilliant young men of the time, to be led to the scaffold because he refused to embrace the Anglican religion. The chronology they've got all wrong because Edward de Vere, the Earl of Oxford, wasn't born when Queen Elizabeth was 16 years old and was purported to have had an affair with him. So the whole thing doesn't fit together. They play fast and loose with the Elizabethan history in the movie. Not only does he have an affair with Queen Elizabeth, but then they have a child, and the child is the Earl of Southampton, the one that Shakespeare wrote the sonnets to. The Earl of Oxford writing the sonnets to his son, the Earl of Southampton, Henry Wriothesley, which of course is another level of confusion. It's a flashback within a flashback within a flashback within a flashback, and you're hopping all over the place. And so it almost seems like it's designed to confuse you rather than enlighten you. There's no one to admire, there's no one to recognize and honor, there's no one of any character in the entire movie. De Vere himself is vain, he's arrogant, abusive, deceitful. The movie has suspense all through it. There's not one warm and loving moment. There's some sex, but there's no love. There's no admirable woman. Shakespeare's plays are full of admirable women. There's been kind of a 400-year cover-up of Shakespeare, as far as I'm concerned. They've tried Bacon, they've tried Pembroke, they've tried the Earl of Rutland. They've tried to give Shakespeare to several people over the centuries, and now they've settled for the time being on Oxford. It really does do injustice to practically everyone in the entire age. It makes Ben Jonson out to be both a fool and a liar. The greatest poems of praise of Shakespeare is written by Ben Jonson, and it's in the folio. Like the soul of an age. Jacobi begins the opening of the entire movie, and he takes the soul of an age and moves it from Shakespeare to Oxford. It's probably one of the greatest examples of identity theft ever witnessed by man. Turning Oxford into Shakespeare and Shakespeare into Oxford. And Shakespeare, they nail him every which way they can think of. They've got him a drunken lout, a fornicator, a blackmailer, and a murderer besides. Supposedly has murdered Kit Marlowe, another author of the plays by Shakespeare that has been entertained from time to time. They don't go toward and address Catholics as the opposition, but the Catholics are the ones, for the most part, who put on the plays, and those who were opposed to the plays were the Puritans. Shakespeare had a very strong Catholic background, and that's been addressed pretty much by Claire Asquith in Shadow Play, which is probably one of the more insightful books written on Shakespeare in the last 400 years. They're presenting the whole notion that the Shakespeare thing was a conspiracy set up by Oxford and Queen Elizabeth to control the lower classes. This movie has no real respect for the lower classes at all. The mob, the great unwashed are there, ranting and raving and screaming, but not, there's no respect for them, which you find in Shakespeare. You find a great deal of respect for the ordinary man in Shakespeare. It's not there in the movie Anonymous.
You taught Shakespeare at high school level for many years. What kind of effect do you think Anonymous would have on your students?
That's a real concern, because it's a real possibility that over a period of time, I understand they've got a core curriculum that they're presenting in the schools, furthering the whole notion that Oxford wrote the plays. It's essentially an attack on the ordinary man. They're trying to aristocraticize Shakespeare. It's foundationally, it's an attempt to undermine democracy, the whole notion of democracy, as I see it. It's an attempt to reinvent civilization and bring the knights of old back with their shining armor and reestablish the whole notion of an aristocracy, a high and a low, an above and a below, rather than what democracy purports, which is that the ordinary man contains extraordinary possibilities, which I think is of course true, along with Jefferson. Government has long cherished is keep the underclass uneducated. That's how they managed to keep the Irish under control for so many centuries, was just make sure they don't get educated. And there is that movement going on right now, attempting to undermine and break down the whole notion of public education. They want a high and a low. They want an educated upper class, and essentially a lower class that's out of the picture. It's an agenda play. It has a purpose, and I think its agenda is intellectually dishonest, because I don't think they have proven in any way, shape, or form that Oxford wrote the plays. It's propaganda. Essentially, it's politics. Shakespeare was writing to his own time. He was writing on a personal level, out of his own experience. He was writing to the problems that he was addressing of his own time, and he was also writing for the all time. He always explored the universal and tried to include the universal in the moment. So he wrote in the topical, and he wrote in the universal. And that's one of the reasons that Shakespeare is still with us now for 400 years, and why he will continue to be with us probably for as long as he has a character put it, from this day to the ending of the world. Probably as long as mankind exists, Shakespeare will continue to be one of our wise men. The best thing you can do is to promote your wise men and to preserve your wise men, and to make sure that they are a part of your culture, are part of your civilization. The destruction they do to Shakespeare here is profound. Probably the only one that can compare is the destruction, which also included a crucifixion, was how Christ had been treated. If there are two people in the world that have to be considered our wise men and have been mistreated, I think they are Shakespeare and Christ. Christ, of course, ending up with crucifixion. I believe that Shakespeare ended up having been poisoned. I think Shakespeare was murdered. So he ended up the same. But we do that with our wise men, don't we?